All right, back at it, part two. So this is not in a T-pose. How do I make it in a T-pose? Well, I can select the hips, not the root, but the hips. And I can right click here and say select branches. So it selects the entire skeleton, right? And then I want to right click on any of these joints, or you could just right click in the navigator and go to 0 rotation. This is going to zero out all of the joints, which should, if the skeleton was designed properly. If it wasn't designed properly, then this won't work. If the skeleton was designed properly, this should zero out into a T-pose. 0 rotation, T-pose. And look at that, rock solid. It's perfect. Doesn't get more perfect than that. The trick is that as soon as I scrub here, that T-pose goes away. Even this is not the perfect T-pose, see? My perfect T-pose is now gone because the keyframes here, actually you can't even see the keyframes because I'm so zoomed out. But if I zoom in on this, every single frame here has that little triangle marker on top. That is a keyframe. Each frame is keyed. So what I would need to do is keyframe the T-pose. So I can right click again with all the joints selected, go to 0, rotation. And now at frame 0, I'm going to right click and go to key at time. Key at time. Right click, key at time. And click key. Don't forget to click the key button. Key. Now if I go and look at the dance, great, 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 but I should be able to go back. Bam, right there. If I'm at frame 0, it's a perfect T-pose again. That's where I can do my characterization. And actually, if your T-pose is not at the beginning of your footage, it doesn't really matter. What matters is what frame you're currently selected on when you drag the character onto the hips. When you drag the character on the hips, when you do the characterization, that's when the T-pose matters. Okay, I usually like to do it at frame 0 because I think it makes sense. But if your T-pose was actually at frame, say, 150, and they're like walking around, and then they hit the T-pose here, do your characterization there at frame 150. Then the software will take that as the T-pose. Usually I just do it at frame 0 because I think that makes the most sense at the beginning. So now I can characterize this. I can drag character onto the hips. Now it's a lot better. What we're ultimately trying to do, and you can see even here, look at this discrepancy between the skeletons. The yellow skeleton is the motion capture, the white skeleton is the character. The character's T-pose was not perfect either. So if you're going to try to do perfect T-poses, you should probably do it for both. Maybe you have to adjust the clavicle on the character as well. I mean, look at this bone right here is the connection from the clavicle to the shoulder. This bone right here is the same. They're very different though. So maybe you should adjust your character as well. Ideally, you want the mocap and the character skeletons to be as similar as possible before you do the characterization. That's the key word right there. Before. Don't adjust the joints after you do the characterization. You have to make these adjustments before you do the characterization. You drag the character to the hips. Because that process of dragging it to the hips, that's when you tell the software, this is the T-pose. This is what I want to be the T-pose. If you go and make changes after that, then you're going to get all sorts of weird results. Like if I drag this character's shoulder, you're just going to get weird results. Do you have a question, Listen? Mm-hmm. Well, it's a good question. So for the motion capture skeleton, it is because it's zeroed. What I would have to do to the character's fingers, that I would have to do a similar thing. I would have to select all of them and zero them as well. And also make sure to select all branches. Where's that? There it is. I don't think it's going to let me do it because I've already characterized, but yeah, no. If I deleted that character, though, it probably would. Let's do all. And now if I zero out, now see in this case, it's saying that that is zero. The knuckles are straight, but in that case, you have to make manual adjustments. You have to go in yourself and adjust. And this is starting to get a little bit more advanced, but if you look at the curves tab, you can actually see the values, the rotational values or the translation values. So you see, actually, this isn't zero. It's actually negative 25. That's just how the skeleton was made. You know, what defined Mixamo defined that as the zero position. So now I'd have to go in here and do all that manually, which would be a good way to look at the front option. You know, I wouldn't beat yourself up over this if you're not going to notice, but if you do have results that you're not happy with, that you think you should, you think you're capable of better results, it's probably going to require you to go in and make sure that things look closer before you characterize it. And we could spend an entire 15 weeks just on refining these processes. Any questions about this? So try to make it match as good as possible. Get your T-poses before you characterize. You know, I could go to the Mixamo hips and select branches. I could zero this. And it says this. This is the zeroed T-pose right here. But you know what? I probably want to raise this up a little bit. Probably want to raise this other side up a little bit. Or maybe I want the shoulders raised. You know, and then I'll lower down this. You'll just have to play around with that and see what gives you the best results. And every character is different too. So I had to manually put this guy in more of a straight T-pose. Is that what makes it look good? I don't know. We'd have to go through and see. Another useful button for you to know would be this filter over here on the right. It's a little joint icon. It's really easy to accidentally click the mesh rather than the joints. See the one I have selected right there, the blue one. If I don't have this clicked on and I marquee select my joints here, it allows me to select just the joints rather than selecting the mesh at all. So it's useful because you don't really need to select the mesh for anything. So just know that that's an option. Skeleton selection mask. There's also other masks for nulls or markers. Oh, I figured out why when I went back to my old file, I didn't get the animation and I was freaking out. This wasn't activated. So I was telling it to import it without any animation. Duh. Load animation. Now it's going to load with animation. So if you ever load in an old file and it doesn't have animation on it, make sure that the import options are actually importing the animation. All right, now let's get back to control rig. This will be the last thing that we really talk about today for the rest of our time. So after you're happy with the characterization and the animation looks acceptable, sure, there might be some errors. You might have the hand passing through the clothing or cutting through the body, but we can fix all those things. The next step is, after you do the characterization, is to bake this to a control rig. Do you have to do a control rig? No, but that just takes away your options to make any edits to it. Just like the one that I brought straight into Unreal. This one I didn't make any control rig modifications. It's just straight into Unreal. So if you're okay with it, you can just skip this step that we're going to talk about now. But this converting to control rig allows us to make modifications, fix things like the fingers, any sort of errors, pinch joints, that sort of stuff. So clicking on the blue button and going to Bake Plot, Bake to Control Rig. Before break, we did the Bake Plot to Skeleton. We'll still have to do that again at the end of our cleanup before we export to Unreal. But right now we're baking to Control Rig. So blue button, Bake to Control Rig. And select FKIK. That's what type of rig we want. And if you don't have, right now I have models only selected, so it doesn't seem like anything happened. But if I click normal or X-ray, now I have all these red and blue balls on here. And also my character controls have changed from the motion capture source to the control rig source. Another useful thing that might be helpful for you is that looking at this now, I'm seeing the original motion capture skeleton. See how I have duplicate skeletons here? One of them is the motion capture skeleton. That's really distracting for me. So I want to hide that skeleton. So I'm going to go into Scene, select the motion capture skeleton, select branches, so I select the whole darn thing, and then I'm going to hide it. And if you go to Display, Hide Selected, it's also Shift-H, it will hide what is selected. You'll be aware you can hide things now, so if you're missing something, maybe you just hit it. And that just gets rid of the other skeletons, so I don't need to see it. Honestly, after you convert to control rig, you could just delete it too. You could delete the other skeleton, but I'm still keeping it there. So now we have a control rig, which is going to allow us to start to modify this. I'm going to go ahead and save a new file again. Call this my first motion builder _ Control rig. Control rig start. If I ever need to go back. What was something that I wanted to do? Let's come have some sort of goal here. All right, so I was saying when the hands go up, you know what, let's do something even simpler. When the foot goes up, I want it to bend closer to the butt of the zombie. All right? You know, I actually might end up pinching a little bit too much, but let's just see how it looks. Or maybe I'll point the toe a little bit more. Or maybe do both. So down in the bottom, this is where things get a little bit more tricky. Down in the bottom here, there's this key controls window and animation layers. Perhaps you've used animation layers before in Blender or Maya or any other sort of 3D program before. Animation layers allow you to make animation modifications on top of a base animation. The base animation here is the movement that we see. And this base animation has put down a keyframe. When I zoomed in here, it put down a keyframe on every single frame. If I wanted to modify this animation, I would have to make changes on every single frame, which is not super useful. So look at this. See all these keys right here? You don't want to do that. That's like stop motion animation, right? What we do instead is we animate on a layer on top of the base animation because we're not getting rid of the motion capture. In this case, I'm just, bending the knee a little bit more, right? Because my performer didn't pull it off or whatever. We changed our minds. So the way that I can add a new layer is with this little green plus icon. Sort of like adding a new layer in Photoshop almost. And you get this anim layer 1. And I tend to like to have a number of these for the different parts that I'm working on. And I'm going to call this left leg. Really depends on what you're trying to do. Left leg. And there's a couple controls here. The no sign is to mute that channel. You can lock that channel, or you can solo that channel. Another thing that's useful for us right now is I want to bend this foot so it is more pointy. I want to bend it back. But look at my rotation icons right now. It's not, the rotational directions are not following the orientation of this joint right here. This has like a north-south that is straight up and down. I need the north-south to be in line with this red sphere here. That's because I have this currently set to global coordinates. Global coordinates are the coordinates of the grid, or the coordinates that are listed right here. Y is up and down, and X and Z are also level to the grid. That's not super helpful for me. So I'm going to change my coordinates, my rotational coordinates in this case, to local, right here. There's sometimes global is what you want, but most of the time when you're editing motion capture, local is what we want. So if I change this to local, watch what happens to this rotational icon. It will become in line with the joint. See, look at that now. Now this axis is right down the shoe. It bends like the actual joint does, right? Or I can twist it. These are movements that we can do with our own legs, right? I'll undo some of these animations here that I've done. So what I want to have happen, if I just go ahead and do this and bend this toe like this, I'm like, oh, that looks great right there. Let's add a keyframe. Keyframe with the key button right here. Add a keyframe right there. You can see I added a little diamond icon on the timeline. But the problem with this, anybody tell me what the problem with this is? The foot looks great at this moment in time. But what's it going to look like? It's not going to snap back, actually, because there are no other keyframes on this because I'm not working on the base animation. I'm working on the animation layer, right? But you're on the right track. This foot looks great at this position, but what have I told Motion Builder to do? Keep this foot like this when? Just at this moment in time or for the entire animation, right? So I've bent the foot, and if I scrub, should see that the foot is always going to be pointy now, even when it's on the actual ground, and should be flat, right? And that actually is not that bad, to be honest. It's still kind of cute, but it should be flat. So what I should have done, and actually I can mute this channel. I mean, down here in the animation that I made for left leg, can hit the little red no sign, and that will turn that off. See, that's what it's originally supposed to look like, and that's what me doing the keyframe made it look like. So what I need to do instead, and what I should have done, I'm going to delete that keyframe. I'm going to find where I think it should start. Where does it start to bend? Like right there, I will add a keyframe. I haven't bent it yet. I haven't done any of that yet. We're going to add a keyframe. And then it's going to go up. I'm not animating it yet. Still not animating it. Oops. Still not animating it. But I'm going to find the beginning and the end of the animation. Maybe it comes back to normal, right? I don't know, right there. And you're going to have to play around with this. And then, so I set the beginning and end. And those keyframes, they're really not doing anything. They're not making any changes, right? Because I never rotated the joint yet. I'm just setting a beginning and end. Because what I'm going to do in the middle here is find the greatest extent of this foot. Right where I want it completely bent. Right there. Now I'll go and point the toe, add a keyframe. Add a keyframe, then adjust the toe. Why are you not adding? Key. It is jumping back now. Bummer. Let's try it this way. Key. Add key. No. Don't jump back. What happened? Sorry. Let's do body parts. Let's do translation and rotation. So I actually selected on the base animation. Oh, well, it did work. I think I was just selected on base animation when I put the other keyframes in rather than the animation layer, which is very important to do. So I just pointed it a little bit more. And I could do that with more joints as well. I'll add another key here. Add one when the foot goes back to normal. And then maybe take this up a little bit more. It doesn't want to move now either. Uh-oh. Motion builder, incredibly touchy all the time. That's not what I want to do. Well, that's better. That's what it was originally. That's what it is now. So you can see, you could start to lay down a bunch of keyframes, and that's just one thing for the foot. What if I wanted to fix the hands? And I'll make a new animation layer and call this hands fix. And all this stuff can start to stack on top of each other too. Maybe, are the hands always a problem? They're always kind of bent out. Even, not so much there. Guess we'll go to where they're a problem, and then we'll fix it. Let's rotate the hands. Man, oh man, what is going on? Don't want to move. Not even on the base image. Well, what I'm supposed to be able to do right now is modify the hands on the adjustment layer, or not adjustment, but layer, on the animation layer for the hands fix that I just made. But it's kind of frozen for some reason. I didn't lock it. Well, this is a problem. I wanted to show you the fingers too. Let's go back to control rig. Hands. Oh, it's because I'm clicking on the IK joints. That's why. You gotta click on the yellow ones for the hands here. Dirt. So I'm gonna make adjustments for the hands here so they're not so pinched anymore. You rotate it around. Add a key there. Adjust it. This is an incredibly tedious process. Why did you jump back? There we go. So there the hands are fixed. But does that create a problem somewhere else? You got to go back and look. See, now the wrist is bent too far forward. So you got to be very aware of what you're doing as you animate. What about fingers? Fingers, same thing. It's the same idea as actually fixing it. But let's give it a shot. So I'm going to start with the fist kind of balled up here. Or you know what? Let's create a new animation layer. We'll just do one hand for right now. All right, we'll do both hands. But I'm going to set I'm going to grab all the finger joints. I'm going to grab them all, though, so that you can rotate them all. Get your camera in a position that you can see. Oops. Hopefully the software doesn't freeze. Man. Let me close down Unreal. There we go. Ooh. So if you select all of them, it will, curl the fingers a lot more nicely. So if I grabbed all of the fingers, I could rotate them all. And keep this like this, and I'll say I want, I don't know, the hand will be normal here, so we'll put a keyframe here, and then I want it balled up. We'll set a keyframe here. This is not the best animation because I'm not spending much time with it. But then when they reach the top, have them open really far, like hyper-extended far. Look at the model only. I just animated fingers. which could take a very long time to do. Fingers is something that I would do at the end because it is so time consuming. And also something that might make things easier is that you can use these things called poses in the pose controls menu here. What a pose does is they're like presets for different positions that joints are in. So for example, I have the 4 finger joints selected right now. I don't have the thumb, but that's all right. I'm going to click the little plus icon down here to make a new pose out of this. Should probably call it like something relevant. Fingers fist. And then when the fingers are normal, I'll call this fingers rest. So instead of grabbing all the joints and rotating them, I could just go back a little bit and then I could say, I need to double click on this and it should go right into fist position. Oops. But what's giving me the error is that it says it needs to be in full body or body parts mode. That's absolutely fine. We can change into that. This little drop down window, right, not that one, but this one. This allows you to isolate different facets of animation. Do you just want to animate the translation? Do you just want to animate the rotation? Do you just want to animate the scale? Do you want to animate the 3 of those? Do you want to animate an entire body part? Do you want to animate the entire body? In this case, to use poses, we need full body or body parts on. I use body parts. And if I double click on fingers fists now, which I created, well, it puts the hand back in that position because that's what I originally animated the keyframe. But you can create presets is what I'm trying to show. But be careful, you can really mess it up. Because look, now the hand's way back there. Let's try to do a more simple fingers opening and closing and then export that to Unreal. Just want the fingers though, not the wrist. There we go. So now I can click on these presets that I've created over here, which makes it really easy to animate things much faster than having to select all the joints. So if you really look at animating hands, we don't really do, unless your animation is about the fingers of a character or they're playing piano or they're doing some complex movements. It's mostly just subtle movements, right? But those subtle movements add so much fidelity to the animation. So maybe have 2 or 3 or 4 different poses: fingers relaxed, fingers closed, fist clenched, fingers really wide, and you can get a ton of stuff done just with those 3 or 4 or 5 different positions. And by making these presets, We don't have to go in every single time and select them. So I'm just doing hands open, hands closed, hands open. Hands just opening and closing, opening and closing. Right there. Should have did it just on a T-pose so you could see more. So grabbing onto these red joints, the IK joints, allows you to position not just the wrist, but the elbow and the shoulder as well. Just make sure you put a keyframe down. Otherwise, it won't save. Take that foot back up. So if you do too much of this, you start to think, why am I even doing motion capture? I should just do traditional animation, which is true, but you'd have to do a lot to really cause a big issue. You could also just delete keyframes too. If you have errors where, an arm goes behind the back or something like that, you could just select some of these keyframes. There's no errors like that in this motion capture animation because it was recorded by some real professionals. But you could just select a bunch of keyframes where the error is and delete it. Just hit delete. And they will go away. Okay, now there's a big gap. The animation isn't going to have a big gap in it. The animation is just going to interpolate between the last keyframe and then, keyframe 659 and then keyframe 66 or whatever. That's one very aggressive way that you can get rid of any sort of errors. And then when we want to bring this back to Unreal, again, I would save this here, motion builder, cleaned up control rig or whatever. And then after you do that, you can go back to the blue button, bake plot to skeleton. That gets rid of the control rig, turns it back into the skeleton. You can see my changes are saved there, opening up the hands and closing the hands, all this time, and that's all I was able to do. This is super time-consuming stuff. But start small. Fingers open, fingers closed. Start small. First do general cleanup, then start to think about things like fingers and improving the animation. So after you've baked it back to skeleton, you can save as. Just call this Unreal with fingers, even though it's 5 seconds of fingers. Well, I did close down Unreal Engine, but could import that and then I would have those fingers animated in Unreal. Probably the most tedious motion capture cleanup that I ever had to do was for that the Upset Dinosaurs video that I made, the costumes, they had to keep their hands inside of little cardboard cutouts, like the T Rex. He has this little itty bitty arms, got to keep his arms, but this cardboard costume that's 3D model, got to keep his hands inside of the holes. So there's a 3D model, there's a motion capture that was recorded where the actors try and keep their hands in the right spot, but they don't really know where the right spot is. They're just kind of guessing. And sometimes maybe they slip through the costume. And that was what it would look like in Motion Builder. The hands constantly went through the 3D model. It's a very particular spot it was supposed to be in. I had to go in and say, no, the hand's not up here, it's actually not here. So got aggressive a little bit and bring it down. Locked to right there. That was a lot of cleanup to do. Frame by frame for the duration of that song. So it's like 2 minutes of cleanup, which is an eternity in motion capture. Yeah, got done. Just put some tunes on, start modifying keyframes. If you've ever done keyframe animation in After Effects before, or rotoscoping, it's the same sort of vibe. It's tedious. Any questions? So I'm going to leave some time for people to try things out, for me to confirm with everybody that they feel all right with everything individually. Remember, next week we are looking at your videos and then starting to talk about the final project. So again, the ask for next week is a film, less than 30 seconds, using your custom motion capture data. Doesn't really matter to me what the character is. You'll put much more thought into your character for your final project. This is more of a technical exercise, so mixed mode characters are absolutely fine for this. You just need to use your custom motion capture data. And I'll be able to tell if it's Mixamo motion capture data. So make sure that you use stuff that you recorded. It's kind of the point of the class. And bring that character into Motion Builder, retarget it, do any cleanup with a control rig, do finger animation if you want to. We're not doing any sort of facial animation now. If you're an overachiever and you want to try to do that, you're welcome to it. Export and import that into Unreal. Build a little world, frame it up with the cameras, make it interesting. Make a little film. Put some music on it, put some sound effects. Export it, upload it to YouTube, and post it on your blog with a little explanations about difficulties that you had and what's next, sort of a thing. I think it's a great idea to use this as a starting point for a final project. If you haven't put that much thought behind it yet, that's perfectly fine. But if you're ready to go, this is a great kind of test. You can consider it. But don't stress out too much about that. I'm just mostly concerned with the technical sort of skills at this point. The artistry comes over the next couple weeks. All right. So let's use the last 15-20 minutes here. Just if people have problems, we can address those. Otherwise, I'll see you next week. We will be back here for the next couple weeks. Okay. Yeah, we're back here till after spring break.
She was
like,
hard
no,
as
I was like, why is the door not open?
Really? It looks good. Just fire everything back. Well, everybody's got problems. Couple questions. Yes. They will be appropriately placed in the that's the zero world position is second for the motion picture. So even though you're importing them separately, you bring them into Unreal. There will in sequencer there'll be two animations. But it will both the two motion picture. You want to blend it or blending doesn't really make sense. So I'm thinking, I don't know what you do.
Okay, so basically, if in one of the clips, and then one. And
That
then like
easily.
one that.
Are they the same creatures and stuff?
Everything's
Same. You just like
Like-
one take.
Yeah.
You like the leg of one take from the arm of another take.
the movement of one.
I think it's possible because that seems like something that would be useful, but it seems pretty advanced. Copy the keyframes potentially. It's in the curves.
Thank you.
and
Have a good weekend.
Yep, see you.
Yeah.
You click on one picture.
And also the joints.
Oh, did that scaling is stupid?
No, it's just like it's going to so it doesn't have that. And I did do the audio.
So wait, what's different about it?
Remember how to do it? Only has like the ones on the right, and the rest of them are.
Oh, it's missing the bones.
Yeah, oh yeah.
So it has the joints, but it.
The yellow one is the.
They're probably there, but they are
So the motion captures the prompt or the mixer does the prompt? Some bones are enormous. This is just an example. So I just selected all the joints. Sometimes this happens because of how something that we don't know is, yeah, where did this skeleton come from? This character. Okay. Yeah, so we have no control unless you're making it yourself. You have no control over, like, some people like really tiny joints, some people like larger joints. So that scaling can cause an issue when we are in class and there's an important. This looks different because the skeletons come from different places. But you can, you can even size this. And this doesn't really, this is just a quality of life. There's a lot of things that has nothing to do with the animation. Good. Same thing. We have a lot of stuff videos.
Yeah, that's the song. Yeah. Mhm.
Now, I think that part is probably
Yeah.
there's the border.
We But that's what I did this.
That's just. Part of it.
I'm not.
Yeah. There we go. Oh, because yeah, control rate.
Yeah. Oh, I probably did it. Oh, this one too. Yeah, I don't think I remember the one. What is that? So big. As long as. Yeah. And the fact that and it doesn't have and doing
Okay. Send me the one, send me the motion to the file. Okay. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with the vote. It's just one set down. Let's see, this is set, let's see. Yeah.
about the